Welcome everyone to the TimeSolv Wednesday webinar, where we will learn the tips and tricks to get the most out of TimeSolv. My name is Scott Clayson. I'm the Director of Marketing here at TimeSolv. I'm excited to show you some of the features this month that are new and remind you of some features you may not have been aware of. Happy to see some people here, some names that I recognize. Hello to Tony, Allison, Poonam. I know you guys join these webinars often, so I hope you guys are doing well. To everyone else who has joined us, welcome to the webinar. A few sort of administrative things before we get started. You should notice there is a chat icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and that's where you can submit questions when we get to that portion of the webinar. I do ask that we try to hold off until near the end to put in those questions, so that usually it seems that there are a lot of questions I may answer over the course of the webinar, and you have something that was taken care of. All of you are on mute, but again, we will open it up for a Q&A near the end. I do anticipate that, like most webinars that we do, most of these Wednesday webinars that we do, this will last about 45 minutes or so. I don't think, rarely do we actually go that full hour. But again, a reminder that these webinars that we host now on the second Wednesday of every month is essentially a review of the tip of the week emails that we send out to all of our administrators and firm owners. Generally, it's every Monday. Sometimes they get put out on Tuesdays. And the whole purpose is to educate our TimeSolv users in new features that we may have added to the application, and I think more importantly, to revisit some features of TimeSolv that you may not have known about. Maybe you learned it when you first were trained, when you started with TimeSolv, however long ago that was, but it was a feature you sort of forgot about because you didn't start using it right away. And now as we revisit those features, you might find, hey, this is something that our firm could use and utilize, and you may not have even known that it was available. I always laugh because we encourage people to leave reviews of TimeSolv, and many of you on this webinar have left reviews for us with various software directories. And there are some people who leave reviews, and oftentimes these software directory listings ask for both pros and cons of the software that they might be leaving a review for. And I feel like it's our fault in that some of the reviews that I've read about will actually say a con is something that's really kind of fundamental to TimeSolv that they just aren't aware of that you can do within TimeSolv. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example of one I may have run across recently. I think it was even something as basic as, we wish you could make time entries with TimeSolv instead of importing our time all the time. They weren't using TimeSolv to actually do time entries. Now that's an extreme example, but that's kind of the whole purpose of this webinar. So without further ado, let's talk about our agenda for the day and what we'll be covering. So again, these are the essentially the last four webinar topics, or excuse me, tip of the week topics that have been emailed out to you. So the way we come up with the tip of the weeks and what ends up being the agenda for our Wednesday webinars is I literally, as kind of the marketing person and one of the front-facing people at TimeSolv, I go to our support staff and I ask them, what are you hearing from people? What are questions that come up frequently? And if you've been attending these webinars on any sort of regular basis, you might learn that we cover some tip of the weeks repeatedly, because we know not everybody necessarily reads every single email that they get, shockingly, and that too, they may not have been a TimeSolv user when we first put out that tip of the week, say 6 or 7 or 8 months ago, or whatever it might be. And these are important tips to constantly remind our user base of things that you can do in TimeSolv. So you may find we repeat some things. I think one of these tips that we're going to talk about is one that we've definitely covered in the past. And I am feeling nostalgic today because I realize this is the 1 year, not to the date, but the 1 year anniversary of our first Wednesday webinar. The first one that I did was in August of 2017, and we've already gone a full year here. So I'm pretty excited about being able to present this information to you. So we're first going to cover a new feature, two new features that were rolled out to everyone back in July, and that is the ability now to generate interest-only invoices. And that was something that we think is a big feature to be added and was really necessary for those type of firms that do charge interest for invoices that go unpaid. Being able to generate that interest-only invoice was something you could not do previously, and now you have the ability to do that. The other thing that we've been slowly working on is ways in which you can customize your invoices to a degree, because of the nature of how the invoices are aggregated together and presented on a regular 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. There are some limitations we just won't ever be able to kind of get around, and allow users to customize to the nth degree of being able to choose a really interesting font that you might like and do any size you want in font size. It just wouldn't format correctly. And at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that you can present clients with a very easy, straightforward, simple to read invoice. And that being said, we have allowed now some customization of the font size, and so how big the lettering is for the invoices that you send out. So we'll cover those two things first. They're not really related to one another, but they both were rolled out with the same release that we did back in July. So that's why I'm covering it as one topic. Then the next topic we want to cover is one that I think is really underutilized within TimeSolv, and that is the ability. First of all, a lot of people aren't aware or don't use the categories, customized categories that you can use for your clients and matters. And I'll show you where you can set that up so that you can categorize all your matters and all your clients as you see fit. But then more importantly, what you can do with them includes being able to generate reports based on those categories. And this is a good way to really, I think, gain a lot of insight into your firm and the different type of things that you do. And I'll cover that obviously in a little bit. And then a real fundamental thing that I want to talk about that we surprisingly do get calls on, where there's some, maybe, I don't want to say misconception, but maybe misunderstanding. It's just what's the difference between a timekeeper and a support person in TimeSolv? And there's one big obvious difference, which I think a lot of you probably already know about, but I want to cover some of the differences, some things you can do to give you some flexibility in how you designate the users in the system as timekeepers or support. And the last thing we're talking about, I think this is the one we have covered before in some of our Wednesday webinars, is using our TimeSync widget. And this to allow you to make time and expense entries when you're not in a web browser on your computer. And some of the advantages of, especially for your timekeepers who really don't have anything else to do with TimeSolv other than making time entries against clients and matters or clients and projects. And they need to worry about anything else, excuse me, within the system. This is really a fantastic tool. So that's what we plan on covering in today's webinar. So let's get started and go right into the new things that we've rolled out here, and that is generating interest-only invoices and then customizing the font size. So first, let's talk about where you can actually enable interest to be applied to clients of yours who have balances due. So let's get into TimeSolv here. And I've landed obviously on I'm logged in. I am on the time entry page. To set the interest overall for every client and matter that you have, you want to go under Clients to Settings. And then you want to click on the tab here, Invoice Settings. And if you want to apply interest to unpaid invoices, you would simply click this box here and then designate what the interest rate is going to be. Now, I wish we had a little information bubble or something you hovered over to tell you. This interest rate is the annual interest rate that would be calculated. So if you want to do a month, if you do a monthly interest rate of say 2% a month, you need to multiply 2 times 12 and get to 24%. So this is the yearly interest rate, annual interest rate that you would put right here. Then you can designate a grace period before you actually start charging interest. And this goes hand in hand with the payment terms. So in this scenario, in my demo account here, interest wouldn't start being applied to invoices until after 45 days. First, they get a net 15 to pay the invoice from time of receipt. And then secondly, we give them a 30-day grace period or whatever you designate. You can do whatever here. And of course, payment terms, we have the options here, upon receipt, and then 5, 10, 15, 30, 40, sort of those general net net day payment terms. So this will determine, these two fields together, when interest will start being accrued on an unpaid invoice. So if you want to say upon receipt, then there's a 30-day grace period from the time you actually send that invoice until it'll start accumulating the interest. Okay, so that's the where you actually create the system-wide interest. You can always modify that at the client level. I changed upon receipt, so that's why it's asking. I'm going to go back to net 15 here and just save it. Oh, sorry about that. Bringing up my notes here. Pardon me. Okay, so for example, if I go to a specific client, let's say Best Buy, I don't like them, and I've told them ahead of time that I'm going to charge them, 20% interest. You would go into their client settings to invoice settings, and then you could turn interest on or off and change the interest rate here and change anything if you want. But this is where if there's some clients you don't want to apply interest to. And conversely, if you under clients and settings, by default, you're not going to charge interest on a particular, on every single client that you have, simply uncheck that box and then understand that you'll still always have that option at the, individual client level under client invoice settings. And then I can choose to go ahead and toggle it on. And once you talk, by the way, and that goes back to other important things, I had system-wide settings set up earlier, and it was 1.5 annually, which is pretty small. And then I changed it, but it's not going to override and change and filter through all of your clients and matters and necessarily update it. You would need to do that at the individual level and turn it on or off. Okay, so that's an important note to make. But here I could turn off the applying interest, for example. So, okay, that's all about how you set up the interest. That's all good and well. But how can we go about then generating those interest-only invoices? So what you end up doing is you go over here to Invoices, down to your settings. I'm going to leave that, not worry about saving the change I made for that particular client. And you will have noticed, those of you who are sharp-eyed, if you've gone under invoice settings recently, there is a new heading here, interest calculation. And obviously you want to toggle this box if you want the ability to enable interest-only invoices, and then click Save. So then let's go to, I'm going to go to a sent invoice that hasn't been paid to show you then how it would actually work. So let's do a date. This date range here needs to go back a little ways to grab some of, I'm going to go back to February 1st and find some sent invoices. And you can see I have a whole bunch here that have not been paid. They still have an outstanding balance. So let's take, for example, this Rogers Construction is my client. This is for their November contract. Here was the total amount. They have only paid obviously a portion, and they still have a $1,675 balance. So I want to send them an interest only invoice on that. So what I would do is go under Invoices, and I want to create a draft and create new draft invoice. And then I don't have any time, for, let's go, for this date range. And let's say, when you normally generate your invoices, you're going to say do July's, July 1st to, July 31st, for example. And I don't have any new time entries or expense entries for Rogers Construction. So normally, if I didn't have that box checked in the settings about, generating interest-only invoices, if I went to run draft invoices for all clients, it wouldn't include Rogers Construction. But in this case, well, I did it for all clients here. And here's a whole bunch of invoices. Here's Roger's Construction, and you can see there's an invoice now for $30.56. And I can view that here. And you can see I have my cover page, and it's showing interest of $30. That's what I'm paying here, $30.56. It shows then there's a statement of account, so they can see where the balances they had, and they can see that there's a draft invoice that was, on today's date and so on. So now you have that draft or that interest only invoice. There's no new time entries or expense entries, and not a new invoice. It's just interest only. $30.56 has been put on here. One thing that I wish we would add to this, and I've actually submitted this to the development team, is I think it would be helpful if we had in here, interest, and we had it maybe in parentheses, at 18% annually, or whatever the designation is that you decided you're going to charge for interest. So then you can go ahead and send this invoice as you would any other invoice, and the only new thing on here is that $30.56. So that's how you draft or generate those interest-only invoices. Now, the question I had, and I confirmed with the support staff, is the interest compounded, every month, let's say, and it would be compounded if you send out a new invoice like this every month, because essentially the system is driving the interest off of the balance due, and if the balance due keeps growing, like, this time the 18% interest was being calculated off of that, what was it, $1,700, I think was what was the outstanding balance. Well, now if I do this next month, the new balance that's due is $1,700 whatever plus $30.56. So that's how the interest would get compounded. If you wait, like I did here, this was an invoice, I think that the original amount due, if we go back and look at this draft invoice, the original invoice that was sent was in May 17th. And this is the first time I've sent an interest-only invoice. So it's going to just compound it for this amount, $1,675. Okay, but the next time I do it, because he has a total of this Rogers Construction has a balance due of $1,705, and it's a month later, it's going to add another month's worth of that 18%. And it's going to do it it's going to be calculating that based on the balance of 1705 and not the original 1675, if that makes sense. So there is a way in which the interest will compound as long as you keep generating interest only invoices every month. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. We think this is a nice feature, and I know it's something that a lot of people, were asking about. If you have any questions in more detail about just how to add interest to your invoices in general, please feel free to contact support or your account manager that you have, and they'll be able to walk you through it. So the second thing I wanted to cover in this tip is about customizing the font size of what you see on the invoices. So by default, if you go into Invoices and Settings, this is where you can edit your billing templates, as most of you probably know. You click on the Flexible Templates tab here, and you see all the various billing templates I have. I'll just pick the default one that we have, the Flexible Billing Template. When you click now under the Global Settings, you now have, for time and expense category here, you can choose one of three font sizes: small, medium, large. For ever since, as far as I know, as long as TimeSolv has been around, essentially we've been using the small font, which is the equivalent of 9-point font. I believe it's 9-point Arial font. Medium is 10-point now. Large is 11-point. So that's really your only three options that we were able to give you, and still allow the layout of the invoice to remain as structured as it is. The other thing that we updated based on the feedback we got, there was quite a few firms that are asking about wanting to actually justify the description field, time and expense entry descriptions, especially when you have a lot of text. They didn't like how it was left justified, and they wanted to have it be fully justified, which we did, but we got the pushback from a lot of other customers who didn't like that and wanted the ability to choose one way or the other. So now by default, this is going to be unchecked, and all of the descriptions will justify on the invoice. If you would like that to, excuse me, yeah, by default, this will be checked, and the descriptions are being justified. To go back to just regular, type of descriptions that are left justified, just uncheck that box. So let's look at, I'm trying to think if I have let's just create a time entry for a particular client, and I'll, kind of give you a quick rundown of how that works. So let's choose July webinar, and really long description that I might have. Yeah, here's one, TRT. There we go. That's a good long, and I got 4 hours. Okay, so that's a really long narrative that I have in the description here. So let's go ahead and put that on a draft invoice and see how it looks. So that was for July webinar matter. Let's go under and find July webinar, and we'll do it just for the date range of today. There's my matter. So let's take a look at how in that time entry, you see how the text is justified here. And some people didn't necessarily like that. So to change that quickly, and again, this is a tip that hopefully a lot of you remember. If you want to edit the billing template, you don't have to always go under invoice settings and click on that flexible billing template. You can simply click on the dollar amount that you see here. You'll see the template that's being applied to this invoice, but right here, you can edit it right from there. And again, now I could say justify description is turned off. And let's go back and go to the July webinar. I have a couple of invoices here. What was the one from today? This one here, right? I think that was the one. Should have just viewed it straight there when I was looking at it. And now you can see, yeah, that the description is not, it's just regularly left justified. So again, a little thing, but allows some flexibility. And this is another reminder. I know I did this, I mentioned this in our last Wednesday webinar. If you want to have some extra space between the descriptions, we added the ability to do that, to essentially add a row. And that is under time here. And you can put an extra space between rows of descriptions for time entries and expense entries if you want to give a little more breathing room. I'm a big advocate of white space when it comes to how you present information, as the kind of marketing guy. And I love the fact that we can do this now, that you can add an extra space between the rows. And especially when you have long descriptions for entries, it could get a little sore on the eye without adding that. So again, you can do that under time and expense tabs for your billing template. Decide if you want to have extra space between rows. So there you go. There's a little bonus tip that I didn't even put in the agenda. So, okay, so let's take a look now. That is tip 1, interest-only invoices and customizing the font size. Again, if you have any questions about this, I do ask just to kind of sit on it here, and we'll cover it at the end. So let's go back and take a look at where we're headed with tip number 2. Okay, and this is the filtering reports by the client matter category. So first I'm going to show you where you set up your categories and subcategories for clients and matters if you so choose, and then the type of reports that you can generate based on those categories and why you potentially would want to use them. So let's jump right back in. Under clients and settings, we have a tab called categories. And this is where you can set up a category and subcategories for all, and apply to all your different clients and matters. You can even change how you want to label this within when you're actually viewing clients and matters. So instead of calling it just category, you could call it, types of matter. And the subcategory, here is location. I'm going to hit save, and these are just examples, obviously. Oh, hang on. And of course, you can click over here under new category to create, obviously, a new category, give a description if you'd like. Same thing with new subcategory. And the new subcategories, and you'll see how it works. It isn't necessarily, sub of these. You don't say these location is only under real estate law or whatever. They're essentially two different category that you're able to use, customize fields, call it what you want. So now when you're under and viewing a client or a matter, let's go to Bob Smith here. And you can see here are where the categories live, and it's called type of matters and location. And I can choose like, okay, real estate law, and it's in state or whatever it might be. You can also do that at the matter level as well. So when you're viewing a matter here, same thing, type of matters and location. So you can apply these to, again, all your clients, some clients, none of your clients, and their matters. A really good example of how or why you'd want to use this is, especially if you're a firm that has multiple offices, you may want to categorize your clients and matters by location. Types of matters, the type of work that you're doing, categorizing your clients and or matters by the type of law that or type of matter that you're working on. Is it a divorce case? Is it a custody case? Is it, a real estate contract? I mean, you can get, as detailed as you want about, especially for firms, smaller firms that do lots of different types of law, and you're dealing with lots of different, it's nice to be able to categorize those clients and matters in this fashion. And then more importantly, be able to run reports based on that. What I don't know, and I'm going to find out right now, so I'm going to be on the fly here, is can I search? No, I was going to see if we could search for clients and matters by the category, like real estate, but that, yeah, it's just picking the actual client and matter name that has the word real estate in it. Okay, so you can't search for a client and matters by the category. But there's lots of different reports you can run to really get some insight on your firm based on the categories. Not necessarily, there's only one report you can actually run that you could include the subcategory. So that's an important distinction, that if you're going to be, wanting to run reports based on the categories you've created, like, the type of practice or type of matter, I should say, you'll want to use categories. And the subcategories, just understand that you can't do as much filtering of the reports based on those subcategories. But in our reports area, you can run reports by category for time entries. And I'll show you, when you click on all these and you go to run these reports, you'll just see, for example, right here, oh, that's a different location. I don't want to mess you guys up a little bit. Where do I have it? Type of matters, real estate law, family law. I'm used to these labels being called categories. So here I labeled this type of matters. I can do it, choose right here. Okay. This location thing here is for time entry specific categories that you can apply if you'd like. But that's a webinar for a different day. So this is a really helpful thing. Let me run through the various other reports that, it's time entry summaries, your expense entries, your task summaries. You can all run by categories. Accounts receivable, you can run by categories. The invoice summary with payment allocations. This is the one where you can actually run by subcategory as well. So this is the in-state, out-of-state I had done before, and the type of matter. So you can run it by both. This is where you can run it by, show me all real estate law that are in-state invoice summaries with the allocations, of course, with payments, which is a new feature we rolled out too just recently. Cash receipts is another one that you can run a report by category. The payment history, all three of our realization reports you can run by the categories. Fees budget, so any budgets ahead of time that you've put into place, you can run by the categories. Professional profitability, same thing, revenues and commissions, the resource allocation, and the general budget here. So you can get a really good look if you are really diligent about these categories and the matter. You can run reports and see, for time entries, for example, where are we spending the most time? Are we spending it 50% of our time is going towards one area of law that we didn't realize? Maybe we need to be shifting resources. Same thing with revenue. Are you making more money by one particular category versus another? as long as you are keeping these in place and choosing to apply the category to a client and matter, then you run a report against it and you can see like, wow, these contractual law matters that we're working on yield a much greater profitability than running divorce cases, whatever it might be. So this is a really, I think, clever way to see some real insight into your firm and the types of actions that you're taking. Now, you could use these categories, of course, for anything that you see fit. Obviously you don't necessarily need to do it by like responsible professional, because that's another category that you can run reports on. But it does give you, I think, a lot of insight. I'm excited. We've added some of these categories that you can run reports off of. So that's why we wanted to make sure that all of our TimeSolv users were aware of that. Okay, let's talk about our next topic. Tip number 3. The difference between a timekeeper and a support. And for some of you who may have been using TimeSolv for a while, you might be rolling your eyes going, please, Scott, I mean, could we get any more basic in what you're showing us? But for others, it may be you learned something a little bit new or different. So I want to make sure we run through this and are very clear. And again, our support people have brought this up because they feel like they were getting enough volume of calls from people who are confused about the difference between a timekeeper and a support person as a user within TimeSolv. So let's review that. Okay, as an administrator or an owner, you can view everyone, all of the users, and create new users in your TimeSolv accounts, most by just going under account and professionals. Some of you, this might not say professionals because we do have the, you can customize how TimeSolv looks and the language that's being used in different ways. And under the account settings, as you might have seen, I could change this label to be, we have, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different labels that you can give the users within TimeSolv. The generic one that comes out of the box is the one that says professional. Okay, so that's just a little aside. So if you go under account, you're like, Scott, I don't see, it doesn't say account professionals for me. It says account consultant or employee. That's why. So we're going to go under account professionals, and this is where you'll see a list of all of your users who have TimeSolv account, and you can quickly look at them and you can see what type of user they are. Are they a timekeeper or are they a support person? And an important thing to note, I think most people here should know this, but I love being able to tell people this because it is makes TimeSolv really unique and may have even been a reason why you decided to use TimeSolv versus somebody else. People who are labeled as support do not pay for a license. They can use and have access to everything within TimeSolv, as you'll see in a minute, without actually having to pay for their license. With TimeSolv, only people who are tracking time pay for a seat. So that is unique. Trust me, if you go and look at the competition out there, they're going to essentially charge you whether you're a timekeeper or not to have a license. And this can be valuable, especially if you're a larger firm that has a number of support people they're going to be working within TimeSolv. So where do you go about designating the type of user within TimeSolv? You simply want to click on their name, like most of you, again, probably know. And down here in this left column under the profile, this is where you designate the type of user they're going to be, either timekeeper or support. You can also, as you can see, designate whether they're active or inactive, which will also determine whether you're going to pay for them as part of your monthly plan. If you change somebody to support, they are still going to keep the same permissions that you gave them prior to moving them from, say, timekeeper to support. If you start them out of the box when you first designated them, created them as a user within TimeSolv, and this is kind of an important distinction, they are very limited in what they can see. So, excuse me here. I need to get to my notes. So awkward. I'm trying to okay. Sorry about that. It's like I never ran a webinar before. Okay, so out of the box, if you set somebody as a support person, by default, they'll only be able to see clients and matters up here, documents, the to-do list, and contacts, or the contacts under clients and matters, I should say. So they're fairly limited. And of course, where we change that as a support person is under permissions. You can make, and a lot of you might be an administrator who's a support person. So anybody, a support or timekeeper, can be considered administrators and basically have full access to everything by just simply checking this box up here under permissions. Okay. And if you do make somebody a support person, so let's go back. And I'm going to make them support. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go under permissions here. This is where you can also designate if you want the support person, because remember, support people can enter time for timekeepers. And we know a lot of firms are set up with that structure where, while we advocate that every timekeeper should be tracking their own time, we know that that's not necessarily the reality at a lot of firms. And a lot of timekeepers will do it through manual methods that they've been using for years, sometimes decades, like a spreadsheet or whatever it might be. They hand it off to a support person who then enters them into TimeSolv. We know that happens. So you can designate, like for example, here, Tony Hill is a support person. He's designated that he can enter time for all timekeepers. But you can, by dropping down this menu, make sure that this support person can only enter time for a select timekeepers that you designate here. So you can choose to have them only be able to enter time for a particular person. This is handy, again, at a larger firm where you might have a lot of support people, a paralegal or like a secretary that each lawyer has, and that person can only enter time for that person, for that one person you designate. So that's convenient here, okay? And then, of course, you can always just designate as much access or as little access to TimeSolv as you see fit. And conversely, I think it's kind of nice, and this is what a lot of firms will do, is for timekeepers, especially, is to restrict their permissions. And this, this webinar isn't about how we set permissions, but, if you want to make sure that there's just rank and file people don't see much else in TimeSolv, you can really button that down. So like maybe they can only enter time for their own entries and not, others and those sort of things. Excuse me. Here's another kind of handy way to use TimeSolv that has come up recently. And that is the fact that, yes, as a support person, you don't pay for a seat. But what happens when the thing that's nice about TimeSolv is that you can activate and deactivate timekeepers, and that will change what you might pay per month. So if you have contract attorneys that maybe only do work for you a couple of months out of the year, you create them as a user in TimeSolv, but then you can make them inactive and you won't pay for them until you need them. So if they're only going to be doing some time entries for September, make sure they're inactive for August or whatever it might be. This can save you a little bit of money in the long run. And I don't think enough people probably understand that if you know that there's people within your system who are not going to be entering time for a month, then make them inactive and you won't pay for them for that month. Now, the big caveat is if you have them active for one day and they do time entries you make them active on August 8th, they make some entries and then you deactivate them on August 8th, you are going to pay for them for the entire month. It's not prorated by the number of days. But here's another scenario that came up. What happens if I have a timekeeper who I know is inactive, but they still need access to TimeSolv? Because of course, when you make somebody inactive, they're not going to have any access to be able to log in. They can't log into the system. So the workaround, I don't want to call it a workaround, but the answer to that is simply make that timekeeper a support person. And then you won't pay for them for that month, but they would still have full access to whatever you want them to see in TimeSolv. So again, this is a good use of resources if there are people in your firm that are, maybe it's a managing partner who isn't really working on many cases, but occasionally they enter time for some matters, so they need to be a timekeeper a lot of the time, but maybe only 3 months a year, let's say. So you only make them a support person and give them all the permissions so they can come in and do all the things that maybe a managing partner needs to do within the system. But, you know, they don't need to be a timekeeper. And for those months they do, activate them, you know, change their status to timekeeper. You'll pay for them for that month and then deactivate them, or excuse me, change them to support again. Okay, it's that simple. So I think that's a clever way, again, to have your timekeeper still be able to use TimeSolv without actually making them inactive. If they're attorneys who aren't going to be putting, or other people that are not going to be putting in their time every single solitary month. All right, so that's covering the difference between a timekeeper and support. The big takeaway: support people can enter time for anybody else within who is a timekeeper, and you can, of course, you know, lock it down as I showed you to entering time for only who you designate. And same thing with active timekeepers. You could lock it down where they can only enter time for themselves, or all the other timekeepers as well. Okay, so again, a small distinction, but important to know about what you can pay for with your TimeSolv account. Okay, so let's talk about then the TimeSync widget. So the TimeSync widget is a really cool tool that we'll go over. I'll talk about each timekeeper themselves have to actually download this widget and install it on the computer that they'll be using it on. But it's a fast, easy, great way to generate time and expense entries. And I think we know there's some firms that this is the only tool that some of their timekeepers use in TimeSolv. They don't even get into the, you know, full-fledged web browser version of TimeSolv. So let's talk about where you end up accessing that and how to go about getting it in place. So for each professional, when you click on their name, you'll see a tab here called TimeSync. You want to click on that. You need to download kind of two things together. The TimeSync tool runs on a piece of software called Adobe Air Runtime. So you click on that, it downloads it, install it on the computer, and then download the TimeSolv TimeSync app itself. And then that TimeSync app will live on your desktop. And I'm opening it up right here, and I always apologize a bit because it's a very dated looking tool, but it's a great working tool. We've gone retro with the look of the tool, but it's great. When you first open it for the first time, it's going to ask you you go under entries and then settings, you'll log in with your TimeSolv credentials. And then you can designate whether you want to show the start and stop time of when you started a timer. Let's say yes. And if you always want this tool to sit on top of whatever else you're doing. And so I'm going to click yes here, and I'm going to hit save. Here's what's really great about this tool. First of all, it's going to sit, like I said, on top of anything. So let's like open up, I don't know, do I have any documents? Here. See how it opened up this Excel file, but it's kept the TimeSync on top. If I have a Word document here, you know, this is a contract I'm working on. I bring it over here. It's, again, staying on top, right? So you can always designate that, go under entries to settings, and designate whether you want to stay on top. This is what I love about it is say the phone rings and you pick up the phone and you got to start tracking time immediately because you know this is a billable client. Have TimeSync over here and just boom, hit start. And it's going to start a timer. And then you can hit stop. Okay. And then you can associate to a client and matter. I don't particularly like the look of the putting in the actual time. So let me go back to the settings and showing the start and stop time. There. So phone rings, boom, start the timer. You don't have to start the timer before, you don't have to choose the client and matter that you're doing this timer for right away. You can do that at any point in time. So now you're on the phone, you're talking with your client. Now you can leisurely double click, choose, who the client and matter is for. If there's any task codes associated they have set up, even the descriptions that you have set up, the abbreviations are built in here. Okay, so you have all of the kind of regular tools to do time entries. Now I can stop the timer. And here's the cool thing. You don't have to be hooked up to the internet to have this work. When you go to save this, it's saved, but it's not over in TimeSolv yet. it's sitting here under, you can have all sorts of entries here. So if you're on an airplane where you haven't paid for the Wi-Fi and you're doing work for a client, you can create a time entry here and then just sync it over later. Same thing with expense entries. So here's an important thing as well. When you first set up your account, it's going to sync over all the clients and matters that exist at that time. And that will allow you then obviously to choose the client and matter from your list that you have. You'll want to make sure that if you're going to be traveling and you know you're going to be offline, or you just know you're going to be using this tool, you're going to want to get in the habit of, even if you don't have any entries here, of hitting the sync. And that's going to sync over any new clients and matters that have been created in TimeSolv since the last time you ran the sync. So like we have this, you know, a tenth of an hour for this Jerry and Friends. And you'll notice when I come in here to the time entry, you know, for today's date, I only have the one that I created earlier. This isn't here yet because it hasn't been synced. So let's go ahead and sync it. And this syncing is not only moving the time entry over to TimeSolv, but again, any new clients and matters I have are now going to be also pushed over into TimeSync. So now it's synced over. If I hit refresh here, there's that time entry that we just created. And you can edit it and do whatever. And now it's off of the TimeSync tool. Again, if you need to create, if you really are tracking in real time, which is awesome if you are, and we really encourage you to actually start a timer and run things in real time, this is the tool for your timekeepers. Again, I love the fact that you don't have to start the timer. That's the one, I think, and I don't want to call it drawback, but I wish in TimeSolv I can't just start a timer, you know, anywhere on here, just boom, and then associate it to a client and matter later. Here you can. This is the way you do it. Have this up, open it up every day, and then when you're starting to work on stuff, start a timer. And then, you know, associate it with the client and matter whenever you get a chance to. And then you can sync it over. It's awesome. Great tool, I think, that it probably isn't utilized enough. It is on our roadmap to update the look and feel, the user interface, the GUI, if you will, of the widget here, the TimeSync widget. But again, looks aside, it works fantastic. It's a great, great tool. So again, to refresh everyone, you go under account to professionals, and the professionals have to do this themselves for their own computer. Click on the name, go under the TimeSync tab, download it, log in with your TimeSolv credentials. It'll do a first sync automatically to move all your clients and matters into the TimeSync tool. Then you can run it, that sync anytime, to get new ones refreshed into the system. Okay. So that is the last tip I have for the day. If you have any questions, again, you can send an email to support@timesolv.com. You can call our 1-800 number, 1-800-715-1284. And also, really important thing, we just launched this, and I put it in the tip of the weeks, the last several weeks. If you have feature ideas that you want to see in TimeSolv, this is where you want to, and I'm actually going to put this in the chat session. We have a new idea portal. You can submit ideas here. You come to this URL, and let me copy the URL, and I'm going to put it in the chat of the webinar here. Everybody can see that, and you have it. So you can add a new idea here about what you would like to see TimeSolv and, you know, improve upon, and then you can also scroll through the list here of ideas that have been generated by others, and you can upvote on it. So first, you can search for the idea. Maybe somebody else has already submitted the idea that you're thinking about. So maybe step one should be go in under here and search for the idea. Just use a search term, and it should find it. Okay, like for example, like make whip. Say you have your you know, or activity code default, and as it searches here, here's the one idea that has been submitted already about activity codes, and you can read it, and then you can upvote on it. And this is going to help us as a company understand what do people like. Here's one already that has 4 votes: automating the flat and monthly fee invoices, which we know is a popular idea. You can look at it by recent trending. Should to me, I don't know why the votes, the one that has 4 upvotes, why that's not trending to the top. Popular, maybe that's, oh yeah. So if you go to popular, you'll see, who has, what ideas have the most votes. So please use this tool, and it's in the, again, the URL is in the chat that I submitted. So at this point, do we have any questions about anything that I covered today? I don't see any that have come in just yet, which is great because I asked you not to, but we're near the end here. So do you have any questions that you'd like to ask me? Feel free to, again, click on that chat icon in the upper right corner, type away, and I will be happy to help you. If I can't answer the question, I'll try to get to the, I'll make sure that somebody from support can reach out to you. So I'll shut up now and let people type if they have questions. Maybe I should have some hold music. I won't start singing, I promise. Well, I guess the good news is if nobody's submitting an idea, must mean that we covered everything well enough. Just a heads up too, I know I just switched to this new webinar platform. Gosh, maybe this is my second one, I think, on this Demio platform. I actually believe we are going to be doing another one, another platform starting next month. So just be aware of that. It may move a little bit for next month's webinar. So, well, I don't want to take any more time from anybody else. Nobody has submitted any questions, so I'm going to assume that we're doing okay with that. And I'll end it here today. There will be a link that we'll send out with a replay, as always, to those who attended, so that if there was something that I covered a little too fast, you can make sure you can watch it over and over and over again. So for those of you that stuck around to the very end, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate you as a TimeSolv customer. You can always reach out to us. I feel like we're readily available to answer questions and take suggestions. So I want everybody to have a great rest of the week, great rest of the summer, and we'll see you in September. And the date for the September webinar will be the 12th of September, Wednesday, 1 o'clock Eastern time, 10 a.m. Pacific time. So until then, it was great showing you everything new and improved with TimeSolv, and we'll talk to you next month. Bye, everybody.